You're listening to the EntreSpirit podcast, where everything we talk about is related to entrepreneurship. Yes, entrepreneurship can be a crazy ride, but the good news is we're in this together. I'm Sarah Law, and here's your host and my husband, Matt Law.
Well, thank you, Mrs. Law, and welcome everyone to another episode of the EntreSpirit podcast. In today's episode, we're going to talk about leading change. And if there's one thing that's certain in every entrepreneur's life, it's change. Now, sometimes you're excited about implementing changes because your company is exploding with growth. Other times, change isn't as welcome and you're forced to adapt due to the marketplace, technology shifts, or a global pandemic. In today's episode, we're going to share some great tips to help you lead your organization through change. Stick around. We got a great episode for you today.
You could have a job, or you can have a career, or you can have a calling. And the best thing is to have a calling.
Joy is the feeling that we have from doing what we are fashioned to do.
There is no such thing as failure. Learn from every mistake.
I'd write down my priorities in life, and I'd get committed to certain priorities.
It's kind of ironic that I'm a dropout because I read more. I like to learn as much as anyone I know.
People say you have to have a lot of passion for what you're doing. If you don't love it, if you're not having fun doing it, you don't really love it, you're going to give up.
All right, everyone, welcome back. And we are so glad that you are with us as we talk about change. And so there's scenarios that we all face in life, and there's seasons in life. I love that my wife wears a necklace around her neck often that has all the 4 seasons. And it reminds you of the seasons in life. Tell us a little bit about that. Put you on the spot a little bit, but it's your sister gave you this.
Well, my sister gave me this necklace after we lost our first business.
Yeah.
And to me, it just means that there's many seasons to life, but there's always a reason to be thankful and grateful. And
we've had some great seasons, and that's the way it is. Like there's a season where you are reaping a lot, and there are seasons that you're sowing, you're working hard to build something. And then there's famines, there's all kinds of things in life. And so as we talk about leading change, there are seasons in your life. And so one scenario that you may be leading through is a positive scenario. And we've been through this as well. And this is when the business is growing, all right? Your revenues are expanding, things are good. There's a lot of momentum in the organization. And people can feel the growth and they are excited. And so here's the thing, when you're growing, the need for change comes because you're growing, and the organization has to change in order to grow. And so sometimes that means hiring staff or asking them to work longer hours. You're working longer hours probably as well. Maybe you have to adapt to new technology, new systems. Maybe you got to expand to a larger facility. There's a lot of work and there's a lot to leading change as an organization grows, and it's a positive thing. And so it's probably the easiest change to lead through because people see the need for change and they're excited about what's happening in the organization. And so positive growth and positive change is great. And it's probably the easiest thing to lead through, but it can still be very, very challenging, and we're gonna talk through that. On the other side of the positive, there is the negative, and a lot of people, a lot of organizations are still recovering from this with COVID-19. And so this is a negative because there is a loss in revenues. The business is struggling, the organization is struggling, and the loss is so critical that it also demands change. And it could be, something in the marketplace, a new technology, It could be a new competitor that moved down the street. Like I shared, the COVID-19 pandemic closed a lot of stores down. And so it's a negative feeling. And we've also walked through this where momentum is
abruptly shifts
Yeah,
sometimes.
yeah. And it's hard, because there's this negativity that people feel. And there's a desperate need for change in operations, because if there isn't change implemented, the organization isn't going to survive. And so sometimes that means letting go of staff, cutting people's hours, cutting pay, cutting things that you were going to do in operations. It may mean transitioning to a smaller facility. There's a lot of negative things that can happen. And it could even mean shutting down operations. Now, you would think that this is the hardest change to lead through, but it's actually not. And I'll explain more in just a second. Because when there is a crisis or the organization is fighting to survive, and if you are whoever you are as an entrepreneur, there'll be seasons like we talked about where the organization is booming. There'll be seasons where it's on the decline, because growing a company isn't a straight up, it's up and down. There's hills and valleys along the way. But when an organization is going through a shrink back, it's not the hardest thing to change, because people are more understanding, because they say, hey, we've got to do something to survive. The actual hardest transition and change to walk through is when an organization is neutral. And this is an organization that is very, very stagnant. It's been doing the same thing over and over for a long amount of time, a long period of time. And it's because people don't recognize there is a need for change. The business is usually really steady and secure. And so there's no threat to its revenues. It's got lots of cash put away. And so this is an organization that seems pretty stable, and people aren't seeing like, hey, why do we need to change something? And so there's no positive or negative momentum. People seem content, and there's no need for the organization to change to really survive. And so you have consistent staffing hours, operations, and this is in fact the hardest to change because people don't see the need for a change. And so we've led through all three of these scenarios multiple times. Actually, we'll share some stories. But when every organization is growing, you're making changes. If it's shrinking back, you're making changes. Even when it's steady, as an entrepreneur, you're going to be implementing changes. So at some point, you, the entrepreneur or leader, you're going to lead through all these scenarios. But there's one common denominator. What's that, honey?
People. I do. I want to make a comment, though. Do you think, Matt, that you could be leading through all three of these at the same time in one organization, depending on the situation?
Yeah, because I think you're going to have, you may have a department even because you could have a department that's hitting the ball out of the ballpark and they're expanding like crazy.
And another department
that is,
that
dying.
Maybe needs to go away.
Right. Or needs radical shift because the person leading it is doing that. And then there's other people that, whenever you're leading people, these are scenarios that are come up. So you may have someone that needs to change and doesn't even see a need for change in their life. So you may be leading a whole organization through a really negative, shrinkage, or a whole organization that's growing, or a whole organization that's neutral. But I agree. I think there are scenarios where you're always going to be leading either a positive, a neutral, or a negative at some point.
But you're right. The common denominator is people. Whenever you're dealing with people, you're dealing with many ups and downs.
Absolutely. Entrepreneurship and in business isn't yes, there's finance involved. But really one of the key ingredients to being entrepreneurship is dealing with people.
Right.
And so that's the common denominator as leading. So let's talk a little bit about some of the growth scenarios that we've been through. And I just wrote a few notes here, and we're going to try to think through. But I think our first major growth scenario was when we were newlyweds. I was 25 years old when I started our mortgage company. It was right after 9/11. And I didn't really, we started with pretty much nothing. I think I had a couple $1,000s in a little tiny building in a very rural area road. And I just basically said, hey, let's just try this out. I was engaged with my wife, and I was like, hey, what do you think about me starting my own mortgage business?
I thought it was great.
Yeah. You thought it was great, and I thought it was great.
And honestly, I look back, and from the outside, it would seem like, how could this make it? But
especially, I think back of how dumb I was, and but I it's funny. We made it because we were naive, and we put ourselves out there. And I just went out there to try to get business, but it was crazy. But we started this little tiny company, and I had a processor who was processing my loans for me on commission. And she said, yeah, I'll come over. And I said, well, hey, maybe we'll get some other loan officers and you can process those. And she was making commission, but she was my partner. I mean, she helped me do the loans, and I sold and she processed them. But she wasn't the owner. She just was just a kind of like a partner and a processor. And we started out and everything was fine for a while, but then we really started to grow.
right.
And we brought on new loan officers, and we marketed, and we went online to find leads, and I went and visited real estate agents and did everything I could to get new loans for the organization. And then someone gave us a book. I think that was really foundational, was The E-Myth Revisited by Michael Gerber. We actually listened to that when we were driving somewhere together, and we both had the epiphany, like, oh my gosh, we have got to make changes.
Right. We knew we had to create more systems and really work on the infrastructure of our business. And but as we continued to grow, that infrastructure had to change. We had more loan officers, we had more loans pumping through the pipeline, and we needed more processors. We needed more of all of it.
Yeah.
So that position was compromised for her.
And so it was a tough situation. And if I look back and I'm honest, we didn't handle it the right way. So we're going to give you some tips in a couple of minutes. And I don't think I handled this the right way in hindsight. I was pretty young. I was 26, 27 at the time. And we were implementing changes, and our processor at the time was very resistant to that. And it ultimately hurt the company's growth because I couldn't navigate through that. And eventually she ended up leaving the company, and the company then really grew even more significantly once that was gone. And so we navigated that. But if I would have followed the tips, I probably could have handled that a lot better. And so that company doubled its revenues almost every year until we closed. I mean, it was really, really jumping, and it was in a high growth season and a high growth time. And, we were very fortunate to enjoy that while it lasted. On a negative scenario, so that's like a positive scenario of leading that we've been in. On a negative scenario, in our training business, we were doing these trainings for entrepreneurs at hotels, and it was teaching them marketing and technology and different things like that. And we had just raised capital with investors, and we were coming off of a really big year the year before, but we were making some changes. We were moving into an office and incorporating under a new name, and there was just a lot going on. Our salesperson that we thought we were going to do sales ended up being pretty sick. It was just a really crazy time. We didn't raise enough money. And then we weren't selling enough, and to make matters worse, our revenues were down, and so there was a tension there. And the person we had working for us was wonderful. I mean, she's a wonderful lady and still someone we consider a very, very dear friend. But there was kind of an internal crisis, would you say, honey, with us? Like, hey, we got to figure this out. And the problem is that she wasn't the right person for the role that we needed. And we had to have a really, tough conversation that change was needed. Like, I'm sorry, we're going to have to let you go because of this position that we need to fill. We need someone that's really technically strong, and we just don't think you're the right person. And that was a hard season for all of us, looking back before that. Eventually that role did change, and we hired a chief technology officer, and it was the right person, and the company really grew after that. And so what I'll tell you is that was a really tough thing. It was something we had to walk through. And I'll also say I probably didn't handle that the right way either. It did work out the way it was supposed to, but thinking about change, I wasn't really thinking through, hey, we're going through change right now. But the truth is, every entrepreneur is going through change all the time, And so our neutral scenario we'll talk about is something that I think we're facing right now. Last October, we started to lead a nonprofit. So we're the president and vice president of this organization. And this is one of the organizations where people were happy with the way it was. Like, we don't need to make changes to this. It's fine. We don't need to do anything to that. And so when that's the attitude, and then you're in charge of the operations and the vision, Sarah and I really talked a lot about how the organization could be more effective. And we believe that change needs to happen and it needed to happen. But people, I don't think they saw that, especially right at the beginning. Do you agree with that?
I would agree. I don't think that people are necessarily, I don't think that they don't necessarily want change. It's maybe just the process of transitioning through that change that's so hard for people.
Yeah.
And because they are people, we have to be careful how
you bring up a great point, because people do like change. They fear the transition. They fear the pain of the transition. So,
if they don't recognize that a transition needs to happen, that's you have to communicate that well.
So I will just encourage you, no matter where you're at, we've walked through these ups and downs, peaks and valleys, and it's not easy. And if you're going to be an effective leader and a good leader, you have to be able to have a vision and walk people through A to Z, the vision happening, what it's going to look like, and communicating that. And so we just want to share with you a few tips of things that we've learned along the way. And the number one tip that I want to share, I think this is probably the most important thing, is that you have to openly share and be honest and authentic with the way you share. You have to openly share the problem or the issues. And I don't think I did this effectively, especially my first 10 years of being an entrepreneur, because I didn't want to be vulnerable enough to say, hey, there's issues with our organization, because it's my baby. Hey, I built this from the ground up. It's perfect. No, it's not perfect. It's got issues. Every organization has issues. So I wasn't honest.
Yeah. Going back to your two examples, I can think of both of those examples having lived through it. If there was more honesty, they may have gone differently.
Yeah.
I really do think that there's a good chance that they would have.
Right.
And being willing to just go to that dangerous conversation, what feels dangerous, but really is freeing.
Yeah, it's super freeing.
People deserve honesty.
Yeah. And the thing is, they know the issues there already. They already know revenue's down or revenue's up. They know that they're, the processor at our mortgage business, she knew she was a big part of the problem. The person when our revenues were down in our training company, she knew that she was part of the problem. They weren't all together the problem, but the problem was there's problems all around. And if we would just be honest and say, hey, here's some specific issues that we're facing right now. Hey, our revenues are growing. We got more than we can handle. We need to make changes. Hey, our revenue's down. You're not really enjoying this. We just weren't honest enough. And so one thing I would just encourage you, whether you're keeping people or not, is that if you are honest about your situation and give real specific examples of the issues, that automatically removes people's walls and takes their guard down and just lets them say, hey,
Along that line too, I would say don't take too long to be honest either.
Right.
Because sometimes you can sit on it way too long and in your heart, I need to say something, but I don't know. Some people are very comfortable with confrontation and other people are not. And sometimes those big talk, the ability to do those big talks, it takes, you have to exercise that. But either way, it's important to be honest, and it's important to not sit on that, and to do it pretty quickly.
And if we're talking about like sometimes the problem is a staff member and you not leading them well, but sometimes it's some other system that you need to put in place. It may be, hey, the way we're communicating is not effective. We're texting like, hey, we're no longer texting. Our policy is now we're just going to use email, or we're just going to use Slack, or we're just going to. So sometimes it's another change, but you need to be honest to say, hey, we have to try something different because this isn't working. So you got to openly share there is a problem instead of sweep it under the rug. And we've seen so many leaders and been part of it where they don't want to acknowledge it. They sweep it under the rug. And like Sarah said, the sooner, the better you're open and honest about there's issues here, the sooner that it's going to be resolved. And by you saying, hey, I know there's issues and we're working on it, it gives an empathy that people will have in their heart.
Don't you think that sometimes when you sit on something longer, that it becomes more of a big deal too?
Yeah. I love the quote. Craig Rochelle says, if the leader doesn't do something about the problem, then the problem is no longer the problem. The leader is the problem.
Right.
And so it's a great quote. So it's the leader's responsibility to say, hey, when something's brought to your attention, like, hey, we've got to address it. So number one, openly share the problem or the issues. Number two, people, if you share it, they're going to give you their opinion and their feedback. So number two is listen to everyone's feedback. So be ready for people to respond with suggestions and criticisms and positive and direction, regardless of what you're doing. People are going to share, especially if you bring it up. They're going to say, well, here's what I think we should do. And so what I would encourage you is to listen without jumping to conclusions. So start off by saying, hey, you're sharing this problem. Listen to feedback. And I think it's important to note for entrepreneurs and leaders, hey, everybody in the organization has an opinion about what you could be doing better already. They're already saying, hey, if Matt would only do this, or if Sarah would only do this, they think,
right.
If you're hiring smart people that are driven and EntreSpirited, they're going to have ideas. And so I would just encourage you, listen without jumping to conclusions. And sometimes people won't share their feedback, or they won't share it in a group. So sometimes you need to pull them aside and have a private conversation. It's like, hey, we're talking about this issue and you're not giving us any feedback. What do you think that we should do about it?
This can be scary for some people.
Yeah, it can.
Because a lot of times as the leader, you don't want to hear the feedback. Right. And it's usually because you're operating out of insecurity.
Out of insecurity, absolutely. So if you're openly sharing the problem, so I will tell you, if you struggle with pride or arrogance, these first two are going to be really,
really hard for you.
Really hard because you're not going to say there's any problems, and you don't want to hear problems, and then you're not going to listen for feedback.
Yeah,
which
you could be afraid to hear the rejection and internalize that too much, but you have to change the way you feel about that.
It's crazy is because the exact opposite thing that you're afraid of, you're afraid that if you share, we got issues and listen to feedback, you think you're going to lose control or people are going to think less of you. But the exact opposite thing happens. You actually come across as more humble, more authentic, really that you care about people and you're trying to solve solutions, but you're not saying we have it all together. But when you say we have it all together and there's obviously are issues, then you really get a ding on your character because you seem lofty and out of touch with reality, really. Because if there are issues and you're saying we don't have issues, then you're really misguided. So every organization has some issues and some problems. So you want to be open and you want to listen to feedback. You want to just be open about that. You may even want to create a team to help you manage those transitions and those changes. So number one, openly share the problem. Number two, listen to feedback. Number three, as you are working out these solutions and these changes, communicate the why. Number 3, communicate the why. And you want to communicate it way ahead of time. So when you are implementing a solution, all right, you want to say, hey, we are making a change and here is why, right? And let's give you an example, like communication issues. We're changing the way you communicate for now. We're going to do this thing and here's why. Like we're getting texts at this amount time at night. We're losing emails. Whatever it is, you are implementing the change. You have to communicate why and make sure that people understand the why. All right. And I don't even know if there's an easier way to say that, but sometimes changes are made in organizations and no one ever explains why they're making them.
No, that's true. And sometimes if they do communicate the why, they do it once and they think, oh, I communicated the why. But like realistically, Matt, how often do you think that the why needs to be communicated?
I think every time you open your mouth when you're in the middle of a big change and just remind them, often. Hey, here's why we're doing this. Hey, here's why. And we as leaders ourselves, we do that. We try to say, hey, we want to tell people why. And you want to share it as soon as you can. You want to share it over and over again because here's the thing, folks. There's a lot of changes in organizations as they grow. You're going to walk through this. And if you just make changes quickly without ever communicating what you're doing, you can really do a lot of damage to your people. And they can become very resentful that, hey, you're making changes with that. So communicate the why ahead of time. And
communicate the why often.
Yeah. And give them as much notice to any changes that you're making as possible. And it could be like 2 months away. Hey guys, just want you to know, hey, we're going to make some communication changes in a couple of months. Hey guys, next month, we are no longer going to text in our company at all. 2 weeks, guys, no more texting at all after hours, email only. All right. So that's a change that you walk through. And then you got to hold people accountable once you do make that change. So after you communicate the why, number 3, number 4 is communicate your commitment to your people. And the reason you share the why, like if you're a leader that just doesn't care about people, you're just going to do whatever you want. This podcast probably rub you wrong. Because number 1, you're not going to share any issues that the company has. You're not going to listen to people's feedback. You're not going to go slow and tell them why you're making changes.
You're just going to do it all.
You're going to do it all. And here's what I'm going to tell you. You're going to find yourself in the end very, very alone in doing all of the work yourself. Because when an organization, a small business or any organization is trying to grow and it's trying to, become successful and move forward, you aren't going to be able to do it all by yourself. You need a team. You need people, whether it's an outsourced developer, whether it's an administrative assistant, even if you're working at home, there are people that you are leading and influencing. Even your customers, like you're leading them, all of this, it's a leadership. And so you have to let people know the why ahead of time, but you also have to know that they are a commitment to you, that they matter more than anything. And so I think when you're going through a change, and if you don't care about people, you're not going to explain the why, and you're not going to let them know you value them. You're not going to let them know, hey, hey, you are more important than our company profitability, right?
Right. The other thing I think can happen with this is that you may have people on your team still if they don't feel your commitment to them, but you'll find yourself with a bunch of people that are just there for their own advancement, their own profitability, their own advancement, and not for your vision.
Yeah.
And that's not a great place to be.
Yeah, we're not. I love what you just said, babe, because you're like, yeah, you're going to always have people there. You pay people well. You're like, well, I'll do whatever I want and do that. But you're not going to have people that are owners
that are your
of
fans,
your vision. Like the difference in the EntreSpirit in corporate America is that when you are leading EntreSpirited people, they are owners of their department. They're like co-owners of the business. And so when you're leading like that, you are empowering them and you're trusting them and you're saying, hey, I trust you. And so when you implement a change with someone like that, and you don't communicate and you don't let them know that they matter, you're going to burn them and you're going to have turnover on your top people. And so then you're going to be replaced by politics, bureaucracy, and not a true entrepreneurial culture. So that's a great great point that you made. People have to know that they matter more than objectives, profitability. They matter most. And so you got to communicate your commitment to people. So let's kind of recap. Openly share the problem, listen to feedback, communicate the why, communicate your commitment to your people. And number 5, and this is great, try out ideas before you finalize them. And so when you're implementing a change, you don't have to say, this is final, we're never going to do this again. The way we used to do it, this is new. And from here on out, this is the only way we're going to do it. Because sometimes you need to figure out if this change is going to work, if this new system is going to work. So I would encourage you, don't tell people that the change is permanent, at least not yet. All right. You are simply trying to solve a problem that they're facing, that everyone knows about. And this is a new solution that you're going to try out and experiment. Not too long ago, we did this in the nonprofit we lead. Say, hey, we're going to try this change and we're going to see how it works. We're going to give it a couple of months and see how it works. And that immediately reduced the rub that, hey, you're changing something from the status quo. So it actually lowered their guard and it allowed them to try out the idea. And as people have the ability to try something out, it gives them to say, hey, well, maybe I will like this. Maybe this is better.
It's true.
Instead of just immediately saying, wow, why is he changing everything? Why are they doing everything? So hopefully you realize by just saying, hey, we're going to try it out and see how it goes, that gives a chance to people to adapt slower. Hey, this isn't permanent. It really lowers their guard and kind of lets them, decide that if they're going to like it or not. So the last tip is a timing tip. And I think this is another super important thing to share. So the more urgent the change is, okay, so if the company is losing money, all right, and it's really, really urgent, the faster the change has to be. Okay, if it's less urgent, all right, it's not urgent at all, then you don't need to make changes really quick. So what I would encourage you is the pace of the change should be determined by the urgency. And so let me give you a couple of examples. So if you're impacted by COVID-19, and your customers can't come into your store, then obviously this is a huge negative impact and it's a crisis. And so you are going to have to do changes much more quickly. And so you have to go right through that. You got to find a solution, get people's feedback, communicate what's happening, and then implement it and say, hey, we are doing this for a season. I'll just give you an example, like a restaurant. They were closed. They couldn't have people inside. So they said, hey, all right, servers, I'm sorry, I don't have a job for you right now. Cooks, if you can come in, we're going to do, takeout orders. And so we're going to do online orders, so we're going to do DoorDash or whatever. So there's a quick implementation that you would have to make to survive. So in situations where it's negative and critical, allow yourself to say, hey, we're going to go really, really fast to make these changes because it's about survival. That is the one moment time that you can do things very, very fast. But what I find is that organizations, they're not in a negative crisis. They're actually growing in a positive crisis. They're growing out of, good things happening. They actually will shove change so quickly that it does damage to people. So if you're in a positive situation where the company's growing, your revenues are growing, because you value people, change should be slower. And I'll try to explain that. So company's growing, doing well, man, everyone sees the opportunity. And if you push change down people's throats so fast, it's going to have a negative reaction with your people. So what I would just encourage you is go slow, listen to their feedback, share, hey, here's what we're facing, communicate ahead of time, and then, tell the people, hey, we're committed to you, and then try out the idea. But negative change, when you are going through a really hard time, it can be very fast. When you are growing, it has to go slower. You should go slower because you value people. So let's say let me give you like a timeline. Crisis, immediately, right? You got to work on it right away. Positive, a little bit slower. And then the absolute slowest change that you should make is when it's a neutral situation. That's when the company doesn't see any problem at all, or the organization doesn't see any problem at all, and you are going in there trying to turn the ship around. You're going in there trying to make changes. So when you're in a neutral situation where people, they don't see a crisis, it's just a different direction, you have to go the slowest of all, because you value these people. There's no crisis, there's no issues, there's no troubles. You value people, and you want to lead them through a healthy transition. And so it's going to take time. You got to influence them with your vision, with the why, with all of those things. And so you're going to have to go a little bit slower as you go.
Is it hard, Matt? You're an entrepreneur at heart. You're a leader at heart. Is it hard to go slowest?
So that is a great question. You're smiling at me. If you could see my wife, she knows that's the hardest thing, because when you're
the leader,
that's
the hardest.
That's the hardest. Absolutely. So there's times like when there's crisis and you want to go really fast, that's not hard for you. You're like, what's crisis? Even when things are going really good, you're tempted to push it too fast and hurt people. But when people don't see the need for change, and you have to go slow to help them see, I tell you what, it's killer. It's a killer, because you want to go faster, and you want to just say, hey, you don't get it, you're fired. And and really that's not the right mentality at all. The right mentality is to say, hey, we are going slow. We care about you. You bring a lot of value to the people. And the thing is, if you'll go slow and you'll share the vision clearly and communicate the why, you can have everybody on board. It just may not be as fast as
you'd like it.
That's
very
good.
true.
Well, with that said, I want to thank you for spending some time with us here on the EntreSpirit podcast. As we go, I want to share with you some great news. As part of our podcast launch, we are giving away 1,000 free copies of our new book, The EntreSpirit, the DNA of Self-Starters and People Who Get Things Done. So we have purchased 700 redemption codes from Amazon Kindle, and we are emailing those out to people who are interested in getting a copy of our free book. You can actually just claim it on our website, and then you'll get an instant link so you can add it to your Kindle library. We also have purchased 300 paperback copies as well, and you can fill out a form on our website checkout, and we'll send that to you. Now, here's the good news. We paid for the books for both the printed and through the Kindle version on Amazon, and we'll send them to you for free of charge. All you have to do if you want the paperback is pay for postage and the envelope we send it in, but the book is absolutely free. So it's a full-size business novel, and it outlines the last 20 years of what Sarah and I have learned as we have led and trained entrepreneurs. So it's also available on in audio format if you want to pick up a copy on Audible or iTunes. To claim your free copy, though, from our website, just go to EntreSpirit.com/free. That's EntreSpirit.com/free. It's important to note that the offer is only valid in the United States, because Amazon won't allow us to give away the redemption codes outside of the USA, and we can't affordably ship the books outside of the States as well. But you can pick up a copy on Amazon. In closing, I want to remind you, Theodore Roosevelt once said, "Far better to dare mighty things, to win glorious triumphs, even though checkered by failure, than to take the rank with those poor spirits who neither enjoy much nor suffer much, because they live in the gray twilight that knows not victory nor defeat." The entrepreneur's life is uncertain. Its pages to be written as time moves forward. There will be moments on your journey where you'll enjoy great success. You'll bet on yourself, defy the odds, and win. As Roosevelt suggested, there will also be setbacks along the way, and your wins will be checkered by failure. Don't give up. Never give up, my friend. Remember, you're not one of the poor spirits that live in the gray twilight of fear. You're an entrepreneur. Have a great day, everyone.
You've been listening to the EntreSpirit podcast. Be sure to pick up a copy of our new book, The EntreSpirit, the DNA of Self-Starters and People Who Get Things Done. For behind-the-scenes videos and more free resources, please visit EntreSpirit.com.